The Urantia book, Section 3, The History of Urantia, paper 93, Machiventa Melchizedek. The Melchizedeks are widely known as emergency sons, for they engage in an amazing range of activities on the worlds of a local universe when any extraordinary problem arises or when something unusual is to be attempted. It is quite often a Melchizedek who accepts the assignment, the ability of the Melchizedek sons to function in emergencies and on widely divergent levels of the universe, even on the physical level of personality manifestation, is peculiar to their order. Only the life carriers share to any degree this metamorphic range of personality function. The Melchizedek order of a universe sonship has been exceedingly active on Urantia. A core of 12 served, better said a group of 12 served in conjunction with the life carriers. A later group of 12 became receivers for your world shortly after the Caligastia secession and continued in authority until the time of Adam and Eve. And these 12 Melchizedeks returned to Urantia upon the default of Adam and Eve. And they continued thereafter as planetary receivers on down to the day when Jesus of Nazareth as the Son of Man became the titular Planetary Prince of Urantia. One of my kitties is quite irritating today. To Machiventa incarnation, revealed truth was threatened with extinction during the millenniums which followed the miscarriage of the Adamic mission on Urantia. Though making progress intellectually, the human races were slowly losing ground spiritually. About 3000 BC, the concept of the one true living God had grown very hazy in the minds of men. The 12 Melchizedek receivers knew of Michael's impending bestowal on their planet, but they did not know how soon it would occur. Therefore, they convened in solemn council and petitioned the Most Highs of Urantia that some provision be made for maintaining the light of truth on Urantia. So this is actually stating that the light of truth on Urantia in the time, in the era of 3000 BC, was almost dying out. This plea was dismissed with the mandate that the conduct of affairs on planet 606 of Satania is fully in the hands of the Melchizedek custodians. The receivers then appealed to the Father Melchizedek for help, but only received word that they should continue to uphold truth in the manner of their own election until the arrival of a bestowal son who would rescue the planetary titles from forfeiture and uncertainty. So this is one of the things that Michael also did. Michael of Nebadon, whom we better know as Jesus of Nazareth, he also rescued this planet of titles from forfeiture and uncertainty. And it was in consequence of having been thrown so completely on their own resources that Machiventa Melchizedek, one of the 12 planetary receivers, volunteered to do that which had been done only 6 times in all the history of Nebadon, to personalize on earth as a temporary man of the realm, to bestow himself as an emergency son of world ministry. Permission was granted for this adventure by the Salvington authorities, and the actual incarnation of Machiventa Melchizedek was consummated near what was to become the city of Salem in Palestine. The entire transaction of the materialization of this Melchizedek son was completed by the planetary receivers with the cooperation of the life carriers, certain of the master physical controllers, and other celestial personalities resident on Urantia, such as the seraphims. Second, the Sage of Salem. It was 1973 years before the birth of Jesus that Machiventa was bestowed upon the human races of Urantia. His coming was unspectacular. His materialization was not witnessed by human eyes. He was first observed by mortal man on that eventful day when he entered the tent of Amdon, a Chaldean herder of Sumerian extraction, and the proclamation of his mission was embodied in the simple statement which he made to this shepherd. He said to this shepherd, "I am Melchizedek, priest of El Elyon, the Most High, the one and only living God." When the herder had recovered from his astonishment, and after he had plied this stranger with many questions, he asked Melchizedek to sup with him. And this was the first time in his long universe career that Machiventa had partaken of material food, the nourishment which was to sustain him throughout his 94 years of life as a material being. And that night, as they talked out under the stars, Melchizedek began his mission of the revelation of the truth of the reality of the one true living God, when with a sweep of his arm he turned to Amdon, saying, "El Elyon, the Most High, is the divine creator of the stars, of the firmament, and even of this very earth on which we live, and he is also the supreme God of heaven." Within a few years, Melchizedek had gathered around himself a group of pupils, disciples, and believers who formed the nucleus of the later community of Salem. He was soon known throughout Palestine as the priest of El Elyon, the Most High. So he was soon known throughout Palestine as the priest of El Elyon, the Most High, and as the Sage of Salem among some of the surrounding tribes. He was often referred to as the Sheikh or King of Salem. Salem was the site which, after the disappearance of Melchizedek, became the city of Yebus. And Yebus is thus the actual name of the city as we know it as Jerusalem. And in personal appearance, Melchizedek resembled the 10 blended Nodite and Sumerian peoples, being almost 6 feet in height and possessing a commanding presence. He spoke Chaldean and a half-dozen other languages. He dressed much as did the Canaanite priests, except that on his breast he wore an emblem of 3 concentric circles, the Satania, symbol of the Paradise Trinity. In the course of his ministry, this insignia of 3 concentric circles became regarded as so sacred by his followers that they never dared to use it, and it was soon forgotten with the passing of a few generations. And the 3 circles, 3 concentric circles, are on the book of Urantia. These are 1, 2, 3 bluish type of concentric circles, and they are the Satania, symbol of Paradise Trinity. Though Machiventa lived after the manner of the man of the realm, he never married, nor could he have left offspring on earth, because his physical body, while resembling that of the human male, was in reality on the order of those specially constructed bodies used by the 100 materialized members of Prince Caligastia's staff, except that it did not carry the life plasm of any human race. So he looked human. He from the outside he looked human, and this is human bodily features, but as a matter of fact he didn't dealt with all the things that are going hand in hand with the human body itself. Nor was there available on Urantia the tree of life had Machiventa remained for any longer period on Earth. His physical mechanism would have gradually deteriorated. As it was, he terminated his bestowal mission in 94 years, long before his material body had begun to disintegrate. This incarnated Melchizedek received a thought adjuster who indwelled his superhuman personality as the monitor of time and the mentor of the flesh, thus gaining that experience and practical introduction to Urantian problems and to the technique of indwelling an incarnated Son, which enabled this Spirit of the Father to function so valiantly in the human mind of the later son of God, Michael. Michael of Nebadon got the thought adjuster of this Machiventa Melchizedek when he was born as Joshua ben Joseph on this earth, or Urantia. By the age of 5 years, he got the thought adjuster of Machiventa Melchizedek indwelt in him. And 3, Melchizedek's teachings. With the passing of a decade, Melchizedek organized his schools at Salem, patterning them on the olden system which had been developed by the early Sethite priests of the Second Eden. Even the idea of tithing system, which was introduced by his later convert Abraham, was also derived from the lingering traditions of the methods of the ancient Sethites. Melchizedek taught the concept of the one true living God, a universal deity, but he allowed the people to associate this teaching with the constellation father of Melchizedek, whom he termed El Elyon, the Most High. So if you are referring to the Most High, you are referring to the constellation father of Melchizedek. Melchizedek is the name of the constellation that Urantia is part of. Melchizedek remained all but silent as to the status of Lucifer and the state of affairs on Jerusalem, Lana Forge, the system sovereign had little to do with Urantia until after the completion of Michael's bestowal. To majority of the Salem students, Edentia was heaven and the Most High was the living God. The symbol of the three concentric circles which Melchizedek adopted as the insignia of his bestowal, a majority of the people interpreted as standing for the three kingdoms of man, angels, and God, and they were allowed to continue in that belief. Very few of his followers ever knew that these three circles were emblematic of the infinity, eternity, and universality of the Paradise Trinity, of divine maintenance and direction. Even Abraham rather regarded this symbol as standing for the three Most Highs of Edentia, as he had been instructed that the three Most Highs functioned as one. To the extent that Melchizedek taught the Trinity concept symbolized in his insignia, he usually associated it with the three Vorondadek rulers. Of the constellation of Melchizedek. To the rank and file of his followers, he made no effort to present teaching beyond the fact of the rulership of the Most Highs of Edentia. But to some, Melchizedek taught advanced truth, embracing the conduct and organization of the local universe, while to his brilliant disciple Norden, the Kenite, and his band of earnest students, he taught the truths of the super universe and even of Havona. So a few human beings in that time were able to understand Machiventa Melchizedek's teachings about Havona, the super universe, and the universal Father. So these few people were very open and hungering and thirsting for higher spiritual truths. The members of the family of Catro, with whom Melchizedek lived for more than 30 years, knew many of these higher truths and long perpetuated them in their family, even to the days of their illustrious descendant Moses, who thus had a compelling tradition of the days of Melchizedek handed down to him on this his father's side, as well as through other sources on his mother's side. Melchizedek taught his followers all they had capacity to receive and assimilate. Even many modern religious ideas about heaven and earth, of man, God, and angels are not far removed from these teachings of Melchizedek, but this great teacher subordinated everything to the doctrine of the one true living God, a universe deity, a heavenly creator, a divine Father. Emphasis was placed upon this teaching for the purposes of appealing to man's adoration, of preparing the way for the subsequent appearance of Michael as the son of this same universal Father. So Melchizedek taught that at some future time another Son of God would come in the flesh as he had come, but that he would be born of a woman. So this whole idea about virgin and so on is all Catholicism and is based on human ideas of understanding God and understanding how Jesus got here. So this born of a virgin is completely no nonsense concept. We can throw it away in the trash bin. Jesus got born of a woman. So better said, Michael got born as Joshua ben Joseph of a woman. And that is why numerous later teachers held that Jesus was a priest or minister forever after the order of Melchizedek, and that is also stated in the Bible. In the Bible is stated, if you return to Jesus, you are becoming part of the order of Melchizedek, which is not correct. Jesus did sometime walk with the Melchizedeks. This was part of his bestowal career. One of his bestowals was as a Melchizedek, but it's not true that we are part of the Melchizedek order. If it would be that simple, wow. And thus did Melchizedek prepare the way and set the monotheistic stage of world tendency for the bestowal of an actual paradise creator, son of the one true living God, whom he so vividly portrayed as the Father of all, and whom he presented to Abraham as the living God, who would accept man on the simple terms of personal faith. And Michael, when he appeared on earth, confirmed all that Melchizedek had taught concerning the Paradise Father. For the Salem religion, the ceremonies of the Salem worship were very simple. Every person who signed or marked the clay tablet rolls of the Melchizedek Church committed to memory and subscribed to the following belief. 1. I believe in El Elyon, the Most High Living God, the only universal Father and Creator of all things. 2. I accept the Melchizedek covenant with the Most High, which bestows the favor of the one true living God on my faith, not on sacrifices and burnt offerings. 3. I promise to obey the 7 commandments of Melchizedek, and 2. Tell the good news of this covenant with the Most High to all men. And that was the whole of the creed of the Salem colony. But even such a short and simple declaration of faith was altogether too much and too advanced for the men of those days. They simply could not grasp the idea of getting divine favor for nothing, only by faith. They were too deeply confirmed in the belief that man was born under 4 feet to the so-called gods. Too long and too earnestly had they sacrificed and made gifts to the priests to be able to comprehend the good news that salvation, divine favor, was a free gift to all who would believe in the Melchizedek covenant. But Abraham did believe wholeheartedly, half-heartedly, better said, half-heartedly he believed this, and even that was counted for righteousness. So the 7 commandments promulgated by Melchizedek were patterned along the lines of the ancient Dalmatian supreme law and very much resembled the 7 commands taught in the 1st and 2nd Edens. These commands of the Salem religion were: 1. You shall not serve any God but the Most High Creator of heaven and earth. 2. You shall not doubt that faith is the only requirement for eternal salvation. 3. You shall not bear false witness. 4. You shall not kill. 5. You shall not steal. 6, you shall not commit adultery, and 7, you shall not show disrespect for your parents and elders. While no sacrifices were permitted within the colony, Melchizedek well knew how difficult it is to suddenly uproot long-established customs, and accordingly had wisely offered these people the substitute of a sacrament of bread and wine. For the older sacrifice of flesh and blood, it is of record Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought forth bread and wine, but even this cautious innovation was not altogether successful. Various tribes all maintained auxiliary centers on the altogether successful cautious innovation was not altogether successful. The various tribes all maintained auxiliary centers on the outskirts of Salem, where they offered sacrifices and burnt offerings. Even Abraham resorted to this barbarous practice after his victory over Kedorlaomer. He simply did not feel quite at ease until he had offered a conventional sacrifice, and simply did not feel, and and Melchizedek never did succeed in fully eradicating this proclivity to sacrifice from the religious practices of his followers, even of Abraham. Like Jesus, Melchizedek attended strictly to the fulfillment of the mission of his bestowal. He did not attempt to reform the mores, to change the habits of the world, nor to promulgate even advanced sanitary practices or scientific truths. He came to achieve 2 tasks: one, to keep alive on earth the truth of the one true living God, and he came also to achieve to prepare the way for the subsequent mortal bestowal of a paradise son of that universal Father. Melchizedek taught elementary revealed truth at Salem for 94 years, and during this time Abraham attended the Salem school 3 different times. He finally became a convert to the Salem teachings, becoming one of Melchizedek's most brilliant pupils and chief supporters. Five, the selections of Abraham. Although it may be an error to speak of, between quotation marks, chosen people, it is not a mistake to refer to Adam as a, between quotation marks, chosen individual. Melchizedek did lay upon Abraham the responsibility of keeping alive the truth of one true living God, as distinguished from the prevailing belief in plural deities. The choice of Palestine as the site for Machiventa's activities was in part predicated upon the desire to establish contact with some human family embodying the potentials of leadership. At the time of the incarnation of Melchizedek, there were many families on earth just as well prepared to receive the doctrine of Salem as was that of Abraham. There were equally endowed families among the red men, the yellow men, and the descendants of the Endites to the west and north, but again, none of these localities were so favorably situated for Michael's subsequent appearance on earth as was the eastern shore of the Mediterranean Sea. And why this is, we will come later on, because this actually also has to do with some sort of default of Ignaton. If Ignaton would have done something extra, so to say, then probably Jesus, better said Michael of Nebadon, would have had be born in Egypt and not in Nazareth. Jerusalem. The Melchizedek mission in Palestine and the subsequent appearance of Michael among the Hebrew people were in no small measure determined by geography, by the fact that Palestine was centrally located with reference to the then existing trade, travel and civilization of the world. For some time the Melchizedek receivers had been observing the ancestors of Abraham, and they confidently expected offspring in a certain generation who would be characterized by intelligence, initiative, sagacity, and sincerity, the children of Terah, the father of Abraham. In every way met these expectations. It was this possibility of contact with these versatile children of Terah that had considerable to do with the appearance of Machiventa at Salem rather than in Egypt, China, India, or among the northern tribes. Terah and his whole family were half-hearted converts to the Salem religion which had been preached in Chaldea. They learned of Melchizedek through the preaching of Ovid, a Phoenician teacher who proclaimed the Salem doctrines in Ur. They left Ur intending to go directly through to Salem, but Nahor, Abraham's brother, not having seen Melchizedek, was lukewarm and persuaded them to tarry at Haran. And it was a long time after they arrived in Palestine before they were willing to destroy all of the household gods, so to speak, the so-called gods they had brought with them. They were slow to give up the many so-called gods of Mesopotamia for the one God of Salem. All right. A few weeks after the death of Abraham's father, Terah, Melchizedek sent one of his students, Yaram the Hittite, to extend this invitation to both Abraham and Nahor. Come to Salem, where you shall hear our teachings of the truth of the eternal Creator. And in the enlightened offspring of you two brothers shall all the so-called world be blessed. Now Nahor had not wholly accepted the Melchizedek gospel. He remained behind and built up a strong city-state which bore his name. But Lot, Abraham's nephew, decided to go with his uncle to Salem. Upon arriving at Salem, Abraham and Lot chose a hilly fastness near the city where they could defend themselves against the many surprise attacks coming from northern raiders. At this time, the Hittites, Assyrians, Philistines, and other groups were constantly raiding the tribes of central and southern Palestine. From their stronghold in the hills, Abraham and Lot made frequent pilgrimages to Salem. Not long after they had established themselves near Salem, Abraham and Lot journeyed to the valley of the Nile to obtain food supplies, as there was then a drought in Palestine. During his brief sojourn in Egypt, Abraham found a distant relative on the Egyptian throne, and he served as the commander of two very successful military expeditions for this king. During the latter part of his sojourn on the Nile, he and his wife Sarah lived at court, and when leaving Egypt, he was given a share of the spoils of his military campaigns. It required great determination for Abraham to forego the honors of the Egyptian court and return to the more spiritual work sponsored by Machiventa Melchizedek. But Melchizedek was revered even in Egypt, and when the full story was laid before Pharaoh, he strongly urged Abraham to return to the execution of his vows to the cause of Salem. All right. I need to unfortunately read to. Well, Abraham had kingly ambitions, and on the way back from Egypt he laid before Lot his plan to subdue all Canaan and bring its people under the rule of Salem. Lot was more bent on business, so after a later disagreement he went to Sodom to engage in trade and animal husbandry. Lot liked neither a military nor a herder's life. Upon returning with his family to Salem, Abraham began to mature his military projects. He was soon recognized as the civil ruler of the Salem territory. Military projects and also civil ruler of the Salem territory, and had confederated under his leadership 7 nearby tribes. Indeed, it was with great difficulty that Melchizedek restrained Abraham, who was fired with a zeal to go forth and round up the neighboring tribes with the sword, that they might thus more quickly be brought to a knowledge of the solemn truths. Better said, Abraham was enforcing people to come to the truths of Machiventa Melchizedek. You cannot enforce others to believe in something and to believe in truth of Jesus' teachings or Machiventa's teachings, doesn't matter. You cannot enforce people into anything. And this will be the downfall for those rebellists that are still alive and kicking on this earth, that are trying to lure as many as possible of God's children into rebellism and onslaught of their fellow brothers and sisters. In this we can read that the Bible has depicted Abraham completely different than the Urantia book is doing. Abraham had kingly ambitions. Do we read this in the Bible? No, we don't. The Bible depicts Abraham as a very sad person that is hardly able to do anything by himself. The picture that the Bible is describing about Abraham is not really representing Abraham whom he was. Melchizedek maintained peaceful relations with all the surrounding tribes. He was not militaristic and was never attacked by any of the armies as they moved back and forth. He was entirely willing that Abraham should formulate a defensive policy for Salem, such as was subsequently put into effect, but he would not approve of his pupils' ambitious schemes for conquest. And that is the whole point with the human race. As long as they operate from their animalness and their animal state of beingness, wars do not end. So there occurred a friendly severance of relationship, Abraham going over to Hebron to establish his military capital. Abraham, because of his close connection with the illustrious Melchizedek, possessed great advantage over the surrounding petty kings. They all revered Melchizedek and unduly feared Abraham. Abraham knew of this fear and only awaited an opportune occasion to attack his neighbors, and this excuse came when some of these rulers presumed to raid the property of his nephew Lot, who dwelt in Sodom. Upon hearing of this, Abraham, at the head of his 7 confederated tribes, moved on the enemy. His own bodyguard of 318 officered the army, numbering more than 4,000, which struck at this time. When Melchizedek heard of Abraham's declaration of war, he went forth to dissuade him, but only caught up with his former disciple as he returned victorious from the battle. Abraham insisted that the God of Salem had given him victory over his enemies and persisted in giving 1/10 of his spoils to the Salem treasury. and the other 90% he removed to his capital at Hebron. Abraham was a very rich person. After this battle of Siddim, Abraham became leader of a second confederation of 11 tribes and not only paid tithes to Melchizedek, but saw to it that all others in the vicinity did the same. His diplomatic dealings with the king of Sodom, together with the fear in which he was so generally held, resulted in the king of Sodom and others joining the Hebron military confederation. Abraham was really well on the way to establishing a powerful state in Palestine. Do we read all this in the Bible? No, we don't read anything of this in the Bible. So another point in which we can say that the Bible is incorrect and full of distortions, especially the Old Testament. Point 6. Melchizedek's covenant with Abraham. Abraham emphasized the conquest of all Canaan. His determination was only weakened by the fact that Melchizedek would not sanction the undertaking, but Abraham had about decided to embark upon the enterprise when the thought that he had no son to succeed him as a ruler of this proposed kingdom began to worry him. He arranged another conference with Melchizedek, and it was in the course of this interview that the priest of Salem, the visible Son of God, persuaded Abraham to abandon his scheme of material conquest and temporal rule in favor of the spiritual concept of the kingdom of heaven. And it is this Melchizedek that spoke to Abraham by saying that he had to look up at the stars and counting them and envision that he would be father of many. Not God, but Melchizedek. Yeah, do we read about this in the Bible? No. We read something of Melchizedek in the Bible, but that what has been written is so severe. Melchizedek explained to Abraham the futility of contending with the Amorite confederation, but made it equally clear that these backward clans were certainly committing suicide by their foolish practices, so that in a few generations they would be so weakened that the descendants of Abraham, meanwhile greatly increased, could easily overcome them. And Melchizedek made a formal covenant with Abraham at Salem. Said he to Abraham, "Look now up to the heavens and number the stars if you are able, so numerous shall your seed be." So it was Melchizedek who said this to Abraham, not God himself, Melchizedek. And Abraham believed Melchizedek, and it was counted to him for righteousness. And then Melchizedek told Abraham the story of the future occupation of Canaan by his offspring after their sojourn in Egypt. This covenant of Melchizedek with Abraham represents the great Urantian agreement between divinity and humanity, whereby God agrees to do everything man only agrees to believe. To believe God's promises and follow his instructions. What are the instructions? That is the will of the Father. That is doing the will of God the Father. That is walking the path of the will of God the Father. That is what is mentioned. Heretofore it had been believed that salvation could be secured only by works. So that was a new thing, that you only have to believe. Promises will not be fulfilled by hard work or whatever, or by doing the works. This is all old, dated information. We now only have to believe that the promises will come as soon as we believe and trust and have trust in God the Father that he does so. So heretofore it had been believed that salvation could be secured only by works, sacrifices, and offerings. Now Melchizedek again brought to Urantia the good news that salvation, favor with God, is to be had by faith, because he brought this concept of trust and faith. But this gospel of simple faith in God was too advanced. The Semitic tribesmen subsequently preferred to go back to the older sacrifices and atonement for sin by the shedding of blood. This is all not necessary anymore. This is all gone. This is passé. Unfortunately, many humans are still doing sacrifices, burnt offerings, and whatever old-fashioned primitive rituals, ceremonies, doctrines, dogmas, and so on, that they have to let go of now. It was not long after the establishment of this covenant that Isaac, the son of Abraham, was born in accordance with the promise of Melchizedek. After the birth of Isaac, Abraham took a very solemn attitude toward his covenant with Melchizedek, going over to Salem to have it stated in writing. It was at this public and formal acceptance of the covenant that he changed his name from Abram to Abraham. So now we get a deeper understanding and a clearer background information about Abraham and the changing of his name. There is nothing written so far about Sarah, and so that whole story that I think is a make-up, actually. Because they are not mentioning that with Hagar and so on in this Urantia book. So I think that is actually a myth. Most of the Salem believers had practiced circumcision, though it had never been made obligatory by Melchizedek. Now Abraham had always so opposed circumcision that on this occasion he decided to solemnize the event by formally accepting this rite in token of the ratification of the Salem covenant. It was following this real and public surrender of his personal ambitions in behalf of the larger plans of Melchizedek that the three celestial beings appeared to him on the plains of Mamre. This was an appearance of fact, notwithstanding its association with the subsequently fabricated narratives relating to the natural destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Natural destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Keep that in mind. And these legends of the happenings of those days indicate how retarded were the morals and ethics of even so recent a time. Upon the consummation of the solemn covenant, the reconciliation between Abraham and Melchizedek was complete. Abraham again assumed the civil and military leadership of the Salem colony, which at its height carried over 100,000 regular tithe payers on the rolls of the Melchizedek Brotherhood. Abraham greatly improved the Salem temple and provided new tents for the entire school. He not only extended the tithing system but also instituted many improved methods of conducting the business of the school. Besides contributing greatly to the better handling of the Department of Missionary Propaganda, he also did much to effect improvement of the herds and the reorganization of the Salem dairy projects. Abraham was a shrewd and efficient businessman. He was also a very wealthy man for his day. He was not overly pious, but he was thoroughly sincere, and he did believe in Machiventa Melchizedek. This is all not written in the Bible. Point 7, the Melchizedek missionaries. Melchizedek continued for some years to instruct his students and to train the Salem missionaries who penetrated to all the surrounding tribes, especially to Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Asia Minor. And as the decades passed, these teachers journeyed farther and farther from Salem, carrying with them Machiventa's gospel of belief and faith and trust in the one true living, sovereign and righteous God. The descendants of Adamson, clustered about the shores of the Lake of Van, were willing listeners to the Hittite teachers of the Salem cult. From this one-time Endite-centered teachers were dispatched to the remote regions of both Europe and Asia. Salem missionaries penetrated all Europe, even to the British Isles. One group went by way of the Faroes to the Andonites of Iceland. And the Faroes is also an island group between Iceland and Denmark, while another traversed China and reached the Japanese of the Eastern Islands. The lives and experiences of the men and women who ventured forth from Salem, Mesopotamia and Lake Van to enlighten the tribes of the Eastern Hemisphere present a heroic chapter in the annals of the human race. You who today enjoy the advantage of the art of printing little understand how difficult it was to perpetuate truth during these earlier times, how easy it was to lose sight of a new doctrine from one generation to another. There was always a tendency for the new doctrine to become absorbed into the older body of religious teachings and magical practice. A new revelation is always contaminated by the older evolutionary beliefs. Point 8. Departure of Melchizedek. It was shortly after the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah that Machiventa decided to end his emergency bestowal on Urantia. Melchizedek's decision to terminate his sojourn in the flesh was influenced by numerous conditions, chief of which was the growing tendency of the surrounding tribes and even of his immediate associates to regard him as a so-called demigod, to look upon him as a supernatural being, which indeed he was, but they were beginning to reverence him unduly and with a highly superstitious fear. In addition to these reasons, Melchizedek wanted to leave the scene of his earthly activities a sufficient length of time before Abraham's death to ensure that the truth of the one and only living sovereign God of all life and light would become strongly established in the minds of his followers. Accordingly, Machiventa retired one night to his tent at Salem, having said good night to his human companions, and when they went to call him in the morning, he was not there, for his fellows had taken him. 9. After Melchizedek's departure, it was a great trial for Abraham when Melchizedek suddenly disappeared, although he had fully warned his followers that he must sometime go as he had come. They were not reconciled to the loss of their wonderful leader. The great organization built up at Salem nearly disappeared, though the traditions of these days were what Moses built upon when he led the Hebrew slaves out of Egypt. The loss of Melchizedek produced a sadness in the heart of Abraham that he never fully overcame. Hebron he had abandoned it when he gave up the ambition of building a material kingdom, and now upon the loss of his associate in the building of the spiritual kingdom, he departed from Salem, going south to live near his interests at Gerar. Abraham became fearful and timid. Immediately after the disappearance of Melchizedek, he withheld his identity upon arrival at Gerar, so that Abimelech appropriated his wife. Shortly after his marriage to Sarah, Abraham one night had overheard a plot to murder him in order to get his brilliant wife. This dread became a terror to the otherwise brave and daring leader. All his life he feared that someone would kill him secretly in order to get Sarah. And this explains why on 3 separate occasions this brave man exhibited real cowardice. But Abraham was not long to be deterred in his mission as the successor of Melchizedek. Soon he made converts among the Philistines and of Abimelech's people, made a treaty with them, and in turn became contaminated with many of their superstitions. So Abraham got again contaminated. He went back to his old life and was no longer the successor of Melchizedek as he was before. Or better said, in between his earlier life and later life. Thus did Abraham again become a great leader in Palestine. He was held in reverence by all groups and honored by all kings. He was the spiritual leader of all the surrounding tribes, and his influence continued for some time after his death. During the closing years of his life, he once more returned to Hebron, the scene of his earlier activities and the place where he had worked in association with Melchizedek. Abraham's last act was to send trusty servants to the city of his brother Nahor on the border of Mesopotamia to secure a woman of his own people as a wife for his son Isaac. It had long been the custom of Abraham's people to marry their cousins, and Abraham died confident in that faith in God which he had learned from Melchizedek in the vanished schools of Salem. The teaching of Melchizedek was full and replete, but the records of these days seemed impossible and fantastic to the later Hebrew priests, although many en masse editing of the Old Testament records in Babylon. So in the time of Babylon already there was a huge editing going on. What the Old Testament records describe as conversations between Abraham and God were in reality conferences between Abraham and Melchizedek. Later scribes regarded the term Melchizedek as synonymous with God. The record of so many contacts of Abraham and Sarah with the, between quotation marks, the angel of the Lord, refers to their numerous visits with Melchizedek. The Hebrew narratives of Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph are far more reliable than those about Abraham, although they also contain many diversions from the facts, alterations made intentionally and unintentionally at the time of the compilation of these records by the Hebrew priests. During the Babylonian captivity, Keturah was not a wife of Abraham like Hagar. She was merely a concubine. All of Abraham's property went to Isaac, the son of Sarah, the status a wife. Abraham was not so old as the records indicate, and his wife was much younger. These ages were deliberately altered in order to provide for the subsequent alleged so-called miraculous birth of Isaac, because humanity still loves miracles and wonders. They are still drowned in it. The national ego of the Jews, tremendously depressed by the Babylonian captivity in their reaction against the national inferiority, they swung to the other extreme of national and racial egotism, in which they distorted and perverted their traditions, in which they distorted and perverted their traditions with the view of exalting themselves above all races as the so-called, between quotation marks, the chosen people of God. How arrogant. And hence they carefully edited all their records for the purpose of raising Abraham and their other national leaders high up above all other persons, not accepting Melchizedek himself. So the Hebrew people have tremendously distorted the entire Old Testament, have made their own version of it. In some lines you can see some truths in it, but the majority is actually edited and related to their own ideas of God, Melchizedek, and Abraham. The Hebrew scribes therefore destroyed every record of these momentous times which they could find. So they have erased their own history. How stupid is that? Preserving only the narrative of the meeting of Abraham and Melchizedek after the battle of Siddim, which they deemed reflected great honor upon Abraham. So the Hebrew people have erased almost their entire own history. And thus, in losing sight of Melchizedek, they also lost sight of the teaching of this emergency son regarding the spiritual mission of the promised bestowal son. And so all that we read in the Old Testament about Jesus is actually their version of how they see Jesus and how they see the Messiah. It's all based on their own imaginations. And completely, so they lost the sight of teaching of this emergency son regarding the spiritual mission of the promised bestowal son, lost sight of the nature of this mission so fully and completely that very few of their progeny were able or willing to recognize and receive Michael when he appeared on earth and in the flesh, as Machiventa had foretold. But one of the writers of the book of Hebrews understood the mission of Melchizedek, for it is written, this Melchizedek, priest of the Most High, was also king of peace. Without father, without mother, without pedigree, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but made like a son of God. He abides a priest continually. This writer designated Melchizedek as a type of the later bestowal of Michael, affirming that Jesus was a minister forever on the order of Melchizedek. While this comparison was not altogether fortunate, it was literally true that Christ did receive provisional title to Urantia upon the orders of the 12 Melchizedek receivers on duty at the time of his world bestowal. And let me see, and then 10, the last one, present status of Machiventa Melchizedek. During the years of Machiventa's incarnation, the Urantia Melchizedek receivers functioned as 11 when Machiventa considered that his mission as an emergency son was finished. He signalized this fact to his 11 associates, and they immediately made ready the technique whereby he was to be released from the flesh and safely restored to his original Melchizedek status. And on the third day after his disappearance from Salem, he appeared among his 11 fellows on the Urantia assignment and resumed his interrupted career as one of the planetary receivers of planet 606 of Satania. Machiventa terminated his bestowal as a creature of flesh and blood, just as suddenly and unceremoniously as he had begun it. Neither his appearance nor departure were accompanied by any unusual announcement or demonstration. Neither resurrection, roll call, nor ending of planetary dispensation marked his appearance on Urantia. He was an emergency bestowal, but Machiventa did not end his sojourn in the flesh of human beings until he had been duly released by the Father Melchizedek and had been informed that his emergency bestowal had received the approval of the chief executive of Nebadon, Gabriel of Salvington. Machiventa Melchizedek continued to take a great interest in the affairs of the descendants of those men who had believed in his teachings when he was in the flesh. But the progeny of Abraham through Isaac, as intermarried with the Kenites, were the only line which long continued to nourish any clear concept of the Salem teachings. This same Melchizedek continued to collaborate throughout the 19 succeeding centuries with the many prophets and seers, thus endeavoring to keep alive the truths of Salem until the fullness of the time for Michael's appearance on earth. Machiventa continued as a planetary receiver up to the times of the triumph of Michael on Urantia. Subsequently, he was attached to the Urantia service on Jerusalem as one of the 24 directors, only just recently having been elevated to the position of personal ambassador on Jerusalem of the Creator's Son, bearing the title Vicegerent Planetary Prince of Urantia. It is our belief that as long as Urantia remains an inhabited planet, Machiventa Melchizedek will not be fully returned to the duties of his order of sonship, but will remain, speaking in the terms of time, forever a planetary minister representing Christ Michael. As his was an emergency bestowal on Urantia, it does not appear from the records what Machiventa's future may be. It may develop that the Melchizedek corps of Nebadon have sustained the permanent loss of one of their number. Recent rulings handed down from the Most Highs of Urantia and later confirmed by the Ancients of Days of Ulversa strongly suggests that this bestowal Melchizedek is destined to take the place of the fallen planetary prince Caligastia. If Machiventa Melchizedek may again appear in person on Urantia and in some modified manner resume the role of the dethroned planetary prince, or else appear on earth to function as vicegerent planetary prince representing Christ Michael, who now actually holds the title of Planetary Prince of Urantia. While it is far from clear to us as to what Machiventa's destiny may be, nevertheless, events which have so recently taken place strongly suggest that the foregoing conjectures are probably not far from the truth. We well understand how by his triumph on Urantia Michael became the successor of both Caligastia and Adam, how he became the planetary prince of peace and the second Adam, and now we behold the conferring upon this Melchizedek of the title Vicegerent Planetary Prince of Urantia. Will he also be constituted Vicegerent Material Son of Urantia? This is a question we do not know the answer of yet. Or is there a possibility that the planet of Adam and Eve, or better said, or is there a possibility that an unexpected and unprecedented event is to take place, the sometime return to the planet of Adam and Eve, or certain of their progeny as representatives of Michael, with the titles vicegerents of the second Adam of Urantia, and all these speculations associated with the certainty of future appearances of both magisterial and Trinity teachers' sons. Well, we get a magisterial son because this planet needs to get its judgment. Each and every person, as well as nation, needs to get its judgment. So yeah, I think that the chances are there that we will receive a magisterial son. The Trinity teachers' sons are of later concern. These are coming into picture when Urantia as a planet and when the human race as species have become a brotherhood and have started to reach the first levels into light and life. In conjunction with the explicit promise of the Creator Son to return sometime. And this is the default that people have in their mind for 2000 years already, that they still think and proclaim that Jesus comes back tomorrow at 12 o'clock, which is absolutely not the case. First and foremost, humanity is not in the place to demand anything, let alone to demand the coming of Jesus. It is all on Michael of Nebadon himself when he returns to this planet again, when he finds it suitable to return again. It is not on us to decide this, nor command this, nor to demand this. So I would say set aside this whole idea of Jesus is coming back and he's coming back soon. This is something that people are promising to one another for 2000s of years, and yeah, they forget that planetary time is working a bit different than universal time. And as a matter of fact, in universal time spoken, Jesus just left the house 2 days ago. Make Urantia a planet of future uncertainty and render it one of the most interesting and intriguing spheres in all the universe of Nebadon. It is altogether possible that in some future age, when Urantia is approaching the era of light and life after the affairs of the Lucifer Rebellion and the Caligastia secession have been finally educated, we may witness the presence on Urantia simultaneously of Machiventa, Adam and Eve, and Christ Michael, as well as either a magisterial son or even Trinity teacher son. So there can come an era where all of them come back. And Jesus has said when he will come back, everyone will notice. Not only all the people here living on Urantia, but the entire universe Nebadon, as well as all the other universe of universes. They will get to know this. How? Through the universal broadcasting system, as long as the circuitry, the universal circuitry of Urantia is not fully reopened, and as long as Urantia is still in spiritual quarantine, there is in no way, shape or form that we can know and see that Jesus has came back, and then he will come back in and under his own name, which is Christ Michael or Michael. It has long been the opinion of our order that Machiventa's presence on the Jerusalem group of Urantia directors, the 4 and 20 counselors, is sufficient evidence to warrant the belief that he is destined to follow the mortals of Urantia on through the universe scheme of progression and ascension even to the paradise, corpse of the finality. We know that Adam and Eve are thus destined to accompany their Earth fellows on the paradise adventure when Urantia has become settled in light and life. Less than 1,000 years ago, this same Machiventa Melchizedek, the one-time sage of Salem, was invisibly present on Urantia for a period of 100 years, which is not really true because they are now saying 100 years, but in actuality for 94 years, acting as resident governor general of the planet. And if the present system of directing planetary affairs should continue, he will be due to return in the same capacity in a little over 1,000 years. And with this said, this is the story of Machiventa Melchizedek, one of the most unique of all characters ever to become connected with the history of Urantia, and a personality who may be destined to play an important role in the future experience of your irregular and unusual world. And with this said, I have come to the end of reading paper 93. And all the information in this paper has been presented to us by a Melchizedek of Nebadon. And thank you so much, Melchizedek of Nebadon, for giving this so tremendous and beautiful information and background about Machiventa Melchizedek. And I also want to say to all of you, thank you so much for listening to this audio video, and God bless you.